Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Pete Burden, and I'm your host today on the Healthy Power Alliance podcast. We're using this space to explore what it means to be powerful together, to look at how human power, particularly as it appears in organisations and communities, can benefit other humans and the planet we all depend upon. We're speaking with people who are in the middle of doing that work, people who think they know how to do it, and people who are doing in-depth academic studies of what works and probably what doesn't as well. We love theory, but we're more interested in practice, what people actually do. So with all of that said, let me get into the depths a little with our current guest. I'm incredibly happy to have Swarnalakshmi Ravi with me today, calling from, I think you're in southern India, Swarna, is that right?
Right, you're right. I'm from southern India.
Great, wonderful. And you're also, by the way, you're also by far the youngest person that we've had on this podcast. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you a little bit about your perspective on all of this. I'll just say a couple of words to kind of introduce you, if that's okay, but I'll let you expand as well. So, despite your young age, you're also the former National Prime Minister of India's Inclusive Neighbourhood Children's Parliament, which is an incredible thing to have been involved in. And I think you've been involved with that for many years, maybe 10, 12, maybe longer years. You've also represented India at the United Nations, I think 3 or 4 times, several times in New York and at least once in Geneva as that National Child Prime Minister. So you've obviously got an amazing kind of and very different kind of background from some of the people we've spoken to, and that's why I was so keen to talk to you about power and your experiences of it. But so welcome. Did I get some of that right?
Oh, actually, all of them are right. I went to New York thrice, representing India and Inclusive Neighborhood Children's Parliament in New York, United Nations, once in Geneva.
Okay. Okay, lovely. Could you say, I mean, so obviously some people will wonder what a children's parliament is. Could you just say a little bit about that to get us started? I'm sure you've spoken about it before, but let's just go with that.
Sure. Before we start, I just would like to thank you, Pete, for inviting me and for having me here and for giving me this opportunity to talk with you and to explore what does power means. And I'm happy to be one of the voices of the young person in this platform. And
Fabulous. You're very welcome.
sure. So, Children's Parliament is a forum for children. Usually, when we talk about Inclusive Children's Parliament, we try to divide that into different parts. Like it is called as Inclusive Neighbourhood Children's Parliament. So let's first take the word parliament, and then I'm going to add each word while I'm explaining its meaning. So parlare is the Latin word or French word from which the word parle was taken, which means to speak. So parliament is a forum to speak. That's what we understand, right? So now what could children's parliament mean? So then children's parliament could mean that it's a forum for children to speak, because there is a forum, there are a lot of forums for adults to speak. There is a parliament that we all know in our countries. There are various other regional and local forums for the adults to speak. But for children, there are very less forums or even no forums to speak or to express their voices, especially children who are from a marginalized or from a vulnerable background. Therefore, we call this parliament as Children's Parliament, and therefore this means that it's a forum for children to speak. Now, coming to the word Neighbourhood Children's Parliament. What could the word neighborhood mean? So neighborhood means that our neighbors, how often that we're contacting our neighbors, and for what are the reasons we're contacting our neighbors despite the fact that we live around them. And so this children's parliament is a neighborhood children's parliament. It's a forum, so it needs to start from the neighborhood. and get the voices of the neighborhood, get the voices of the grassroots, federate at various levels in the multi-tier federated levels, like those of villages, panchayats, or panchayat an Indian term, but villages, cities, towns, states, nations, and even at the global level. And that's therefore we call this as neighborhood children's parliament. Now, why do we call this as inclusive neighborhood children's parliament? Inclusive because we involve children from different backgrounds, from different areas, or children who are, despite the fact that whether they are rich or poor, whether they are marginalized or from an elite background, whether they are from an experienced community-based background or non-experienced, whether they have power, whether they have no power, we just wanted to include everyone, despite of their disability, language, race, religion, color, sex, place of birth, or any of them. We just wanted to involve them into this parliament, which is why, and we wanted to carry their voices from grassroots to global. And that's why we call this inclusive neighborhood children's parliament.
Fantastic. And when did you first get involved in, and how did you get involved?
How did I get involved? Well, thank you for asking that. One of the reasons why I'm saying thank you is like it's hard to even recall, because I was 10 years old, I guess, when I was joining the Children's Parliament in grade 6. I remember one of my teachers came and told me, Swarna, there's something called Children's Parliament is happening. Would you be interested to join that kind of a parliament? And my interest was ignited since then by that teacher.
Great. And can you give us some idea of the scale? How long ago was that? How many years ago was that?
Right now I'm 25, so it must be 15 years back.
Wow. Okay. And can you give us some idea of the scale of this now? It was going on and it grew, presumably. How many people have been involved and all of that kind of thing?
Sure. So when I was in grade 6, I started my journey. Along with me, some of my, I studied in a school for persons with visual disability, and it was a special school. I called it special because it's kind of a school where only persons with visual disabilities study. And therefore, I called this as a special school. Special not in terms of joy or happiness, but I'm just saying in terms of exclusion that we confront. So this school is a special school for persons with visual disabilities, and I pursued my education there. And it's a school within the city, and therefore even I as a child didn't get more chance to explore my neighborhood or more opportunity to encounter with my peers who are not having disabilities, and therefore I did not have much exposure. So when the Children's Parliament was introduced in my school, some of my friends, along with me from my school for the blind, involved in that. And later it expanded at the higher levels, like state, national level, international level, and global level. And as and when it started expanding, I encountered with more and more parliamentarians. At the state level, we were about, each parliament would consist of 30 members, between 15 to 30 you can see. And the age criteria would be between 12 and 18 years. But sometimes you can also have, in exceptional cases or wherever needed, you can also involve children who are 10 years of age as well. Depending upon their voices, depending upon their needs, you can have that criteria in place. One of the reasons why we had that age criteria is power again. Because sometimes you can have children who are aged 6 to 18 in one place, but 6 to 10 has a different power compared to children who are, in their teenage. That's one of the reasons why we have had that kind of an age criteria in place.
Sure, fantastic. And can we start talking a little bit about power? Thank you. You've mentioned the word, and I just want to say that on this podcast we're using a very simple definition of power, because we know that academics have lots of different ways of looking at power, and we're just using this very simple definition of power as the ability to kind of meet your needs or to accomplish your goals. And then by healthy power, we mean when you're doing that in a way that actually doesn't take away from other people, but actually increases the power of the other people that you're working with. So I'd like to ask you a little bit more about power. I mean, presumably this whole development ending up with you as the Prime Minister and going to the UN and all of those kind of things, you had a lot of experiences of power. But when did you first discover that there even was such a thing as power, do you think?
Thank you for this question, because I would like to see this question in two different perspectives. The first perspective is that when I discovered power, when I discovered the fact that, well, there's power that's needed, when I got into that power structure. So to answer the second question, when I got into the power structure, or when I was told that I know about power, is when I was a child. My mom once told me a story about I'd like to recall my childhood here. So my mom once told me a story that when I was a kid, I would not want any other kids to sit on my mom's lap. It seems like I mean, my mom is pretty strict, and she doesn't want me to push any child away when sorry about it. So she doesn't want me to push away any child who is wanting to sit on my mom's lap. And it's not an encouraging behavior, right? So she doesn't encourage that behavior. So it seemed like to fulfill my desire and also to keep my mom happy, I seem to have encountered I seem to have used a power trick. So I understood from my mom's statement that I try to sit on one end of my mom's lap, considering the fact that other child is sitting in the middle of my mom's lap.
Yeah.
So
okay.
when I'm at the corner, when I'm at the end, the child would slightly move, because my feet or my leg or my body would slightly touch the other person's body. So the child would automatically move towards the other end from the middle. I would keep moving slowly and gently without pushing the child, and I would gently move to the middle, while the child, on the other hand, would be towards the other end. When I even move further, then the child would have no other way except to just get down from my mom's lap.
It's a brilliant example of using kind of power even as a very young child. Would these have been your siblings? Did you have siblings then?
No, I was not having siblings, but
Okay.
I think I used to do the same with my cousin. So my mom tries to lift my cousin. I think my cousins were more or less my age, and so whenever they come and try to sit on. And I also encountered power when I was, I think, trying to. My aunt was feeding my brother, my cousin. Like in India, we call our cousins as brother and sisters. But my aunt was feeding my cousin some milk or something in the bottle. I wanted to really explore that bottle, and I think I just took the bottle, and I also wanted to take a sip from that bottle. I think I seem to have bitten the rubber on top of the bottle a little hard, which made a hole in the rubber. And therefore, when that guy was trying to drink more milk, the milk was not in proper flow, that the guy had to the guy was the guy had got hiccups. And then my aunt realized what's happening, and she realized that because she handed me over the bottle, she just checked the top of the bottle and realized that there is a hole because I'm with that. So I understood that it's force. It's kind of the strength, right? It's the power.
Yes.
So that's also yet another example.
Yeah, and it has this effect, doesn't it, which is so interesting of, like you said, when moving across the laps. I mean, you were kind of, you ended up excluding, in a way, kind of pushing that other person out,
Yeah.
which is one, is one of the things that happens with power, isn't it? I suppose when power is used in a way of one person over another. So say a little bit more then about your, that was very early.
Discovery. Yeah.
Yeah, say a little bit more about how you understand power then now. I mean, how do you think about power in your relationships with other people? How do you think about it today?
Sure. Actually, I think I'm happy to share about my current thinking as well, but I think I haven't also answered the previous question about when did I discover about power?
Okay.
I discovered power when I was in Children's Parliament. When I was able to talk for somebody, I realized that I'm able to talk for somebody, and that means that I have responsibility. But above responsibility, above and beyond responsibility, I'm representing someone, right? And that means that I have power. That means that
Okay.
I have some ability to kind of talk for that person. So when I talk for somebody, then I felt a bit powerful. And I also felt that that power has the ability to go both in a positive and as well as in a negative way. For example, if I had the ego, or oh no, I gotta be the representative, and so I will choose what is right or what needs to go up or what needs. So if there is no feedback, I realized that, and as and when I started learning sociocracy, I got more deeper understanding that I realized when there is no feedback, then power could go negative. When there is feedback, then there is always a healthy power that could go in a positive streamline. So.
Okay. That's beautiful. So let's say a little bit more about that. So, and just to say, you mentioned sociocracy, and I know that sociocracy was used as the method within, or is used within the method within the Children's Parliament. So can you just say a little bit about how that works then in practice?
Sure. Well, in practice, you asked, so I meant to even talk about the principles of sociocracy, but then I realized that actually it's not time for me to talk about the principles. Rather, let me just tell you what is in practice that currently we follow and that currently works with us. So the practice is that we all sit in circles, which is one of the principles of sociocracy. And second, we go in rounds. We try to ensure everybody's included in a round. When we go in a round, we try to call out names. I recently had a meeting with someone, and we suddenly wanted to share ideas, and everybody was just getting ideas in a flow, and one person wanted to really come in and say, shall I come in? And then as a facilitator, I was just saying that, yeah, thank you very much. I usually have this practice of inviting somebody, and like, for example, if I'm like, let's say you are here, and there's one other person, or Mr. B, Mr. C, all those people are there, and Mrs. D and all those people are there, and I would say Pete and then Mrs. C and then Mr. B. That's my way of saying. So like, who is next to who is something that I would say, so that the other person would be ready. And while I've been doing that facilitation, I already mentioned that Mr. B would go after Mrs. C, but Mr. D encountered, he just interfered in between and said, shall I come in? And I was able to push with my power as a facilitator, that could you, I already mentioned that Mr. B, it has to come after Mrs. C. Do you have anything important or anything more urgent than, a more urgent matter to be discussed at the moment, at this point? Otherwise, could I just come back after B? So that person was just quiet, and he just. And I feel that's not just because of facilitation, but that's also because of ground rules, and that's also because of the system. So that's how sociocracy is handling power. And that's one of the things that we have in practice as well. So sociocracy has check-ins and closing rounds, and it also has this agenda usually prepared before the meeting. And we also follow the principles of consent. That's one of the major principles. I'm sorry, I really forgot to mention that, but that's one of the major principles of sociocracy. As I was really deep into the conversation, I totally forgot about consent, but consent is one of the major principles of sociocracy, which talks about acceptance rather than agreement. Agreement is consensus. So when you agree on things, you would have intellectual arguments against, for and against it. But this is like more of acceptance, like whether things are good enough for now and safe enough to try it, and thinking about near future than thinking about far future, or thinking about too much something that's not in the reach right at the moment. So that's something that we follow as well. These are things, and we also follow consent based on elections. So our elections would not be based on majority voting, and this is based on consent. Yeah.
That's a super brief but very concise introduction to sociocracy. I mean, sometimes people talk about range of tolerance, don't they, in there? But you've covered all the main pieces that I can think of. And of course, there are lots of videos on the web now about sociocracy and all of that. So we don't. I think people have probably got enough from what you've said to go and explore all those words and read up about it and so forth. But what I was really interested in earlier, you were talking about, and you were talking about this idea of speaking for other people. So particularly that was that as you were becoming, getting roles at different levels within the circles, and then you found yourself, because there's one thing I heard very clearly, that it's important to be able to speak up for yourself, and then you're saying as a facilitator or as somebody with a particular role, speaking up for other people as well. Can you say a little bit more about the speaking up for other people? And I think you said something like it felt powerful.
Yes, I did use the word. It felt powerful. It made me feel that I'm having some power, because, like, as I told you with the example of me requesting the other person to go after the person who I already mentioned, and also staying stuck with the ground rules, being as a facilitator, these things, I think to get it, just also, as I told you, the feedback, all these elements, there are different elements that brings the power. So I wouldn't call that there is only one particular element that just makes us feel powerful, but there are different elements together could make us feel powerful, in my experience. And when you want to speak up for others, that feeling itself would just bring a power. And whenever because you would be appreciated when you speak up for the others, and you would be given credits for that. Oh yeah, Mr. Pete, you just spoke for the entire community. Congratulations. So more than the community is seen, now Pete is seen on the stage, seen like amidst of everybody. So when I'm sorry, can I take you as an example? I didn't really.
Of course.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So when Pete is representing a community, now Pete is seen as the whole community, and Pete, the name would now get the credits rather than the community, and that name would just make you feel powerful. That's how I experience power in my area, or in my experience. That's how I have experienced power whenever I advocated for people. But I think it's really important to be careful about it. It's super important to also speak up for yourself. I really liked when you were talking about speaking up. It's important. It's equally important to speak up for yourself too. So when you are speaking for others, what you end up doing is you forget yourself. You forget your opinion. You forget who you are. And I think it's also important that you represent along with the community yourself in the forum wherever you go. That's something that I felt I had missed many times. For example, whenever I had advocated for children who needed a lot of relief measures, or who are in vulnerable situation, and whenever I talk about them, I had for quite some time I had forgotten that even I myself needed some support, and I myself represent a community, a whole lot of different community to the community that I'm representing, because mine is more of inclusion of persons with disabilities. And I really forgot that was like hidden. I have forgotten that fact while I've been representing other marginalized sections. So I think it's also important to speak up for yourself while you're speaking for the others. And that's what I think Sociocracy brings in its practice. Because as a facilitator, you must also need to go along with the others. So while I'm calling Pete Mr. BCD, then I should also ensure that I go somewhere in between, or while I'm calling out their names. If I forget, then somebody like B or somebody like Pete would just come and remind me that, hey, actually you forgot. I have had children reminding me, Swarna, you forgot yourself. So I would just go ahead and share my opinion. So that's kind of, to me, is the power of speaking for ourselves. So the system actually gives us the power more than what we gain or how we gain. For example, in democratic system, the power we call the power is mostly with people, right? So people elect the representative, and the representative is now more powerful. Why is the representative feeling powerful? It's because they're elected by people, and which means that they have the consent of quite a lot of people for them to be in that position. So that kind of a consent also gives power. So it's altogether the system that I would say has the.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was going to say that as well. There's something in the system and the way it works, and the electoral system you were just mentioning then as well, which is using consent in sociocracy as well. There's something about that system that even if as an individual you forget yourself and your place in the process, the system is going to remind you, which is a real benefit. So I totally get that and think that's very helpful. You also mentioned, I think you also mentioned ego though. So you said, did you earlier on?
I did.
And what did you mean by that then? How does that get in the way of all of this? Well, how does it get involved?
I think as I've been talking about the name being, getting the credits, and the name is being seen as the whole community, I think that's when the ego gets in place. And it's like, oh, I'm the community, so then I got the power, so let me just decide. And then every time if I go back to really talk to my community, then and I think it's also about the feedback that's missing that could also bring our ego, is what I feel. Because so I've been previously working in a company, and as I've been working, as I was working, I realized that I was working in a hierarchical system as opposed to sociocracy, because I'm glad that I should say that I'm glad I got this opportunity to work with sociocratic practice since my childhood. So I was aware how consent decision making would work.
At a very young age.
Well, yeah, perhaps. I mean, I just wanted to say that you said I'm the youngest person, but I also wanted to say that I'm 25. Do you still think that I'm the youngest?
Well, so far you are on this podcast series, but we could easily get some younger people involved. Yeah, that would be a good thing to do. But keep going.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, sorry for this off topic, but yes, I was quite curious about that. Anyways, I think this ego comes in place when there is no feedback. So as I've been working in this previous company, I encountered hierarchical system, and I was trying to represent a couple of people to my management, and my management was not ready to hear me. And at that time I felt powerless, because I'm now representing and the feedback is not being heard. And so everything has to come from the top down. Then when that happens, like for example, a couple of people were saying like, "Ma'am, this is not going to work because at the bottom level, at the ground level, this is not the reality. Children have or people have so and so issues." I mean, I don't want to point out specific issues.
But something was, the feedback wasn't being heard, basically.
The feedback, basically, yes, that's what I would say. Thank you. The feedback wasn't heard, and therefore it disrupted the whole system, and all of us just came out of the company. That's what I would say. Many of us just came out of that company because of the fact that the feedback was not working properly. The feedback was not heard.
It's very important. Can I just go back as well to the children's parliaments as well then? So the other thing that happened, as I gather it, was that you, I don't want to say you kind of went higher because we're talking about circles, but on the other hand, you did become Prime Minister, and then you did get to go and talk at the United Nations and all those things. So was that a particular strain of kind of ego? How did you not become overinflated, I suppose, when you were at those giddy heights?
I think it's also about the value system. I should really thank my mother here, because when I became the Prime Minister, it's very easy for people to say, "Oh, you're the Prime Minister." Yes. "Oh, Prime Minister." The way they just reacted was just this way. And whenever I go, they would also expect me, "You're the Prime Minister. How come that you can say you don't know the population of India or you don't know the population of Tamil Nadu?" I'm sorry, I'm a kid, and I don't think you should expect me to know every bit of it. But I do have that responsibility, and in my responsibility, I'm here to learn. I'm not resisting to learn, but I'm just saying that I don't know. And I think so that also made me feel that I have some sort of power, and I should not. So, I mean, there are different reasons. Just to classify it: one, value system that we develop, and two, the societal perceptions and notions that we encounter, and three, as usual, the system itself, the governance system that we follow. So just to explain each of these factors, my mom really helped me to build my value system. When people said, "Oh, you're the Prime Minister," and when they made it like a big thing, my mom said, "Well, you're not in your power, but it's a responsibility. So you're in a big responsibility." So when you say responsibility, that it means that it's on your shoulders. You're carrying something. So would you feel powerful when you carry a bag, or would you feel powerful when you walk freely?
Nice.
So that's kind of an example that she gave, which developed a lot. It's kind of like you are now in a power. Yes, agree, but you do have a responsibility. You're carrying a bag, so which means that there's something that's pushing you back, and therefore you're pushing something against it. You're powerful, but yet you're responsible. So that kind of brings up the responsibility. And second thing, I would say the societal notions. That was also bringing a little bit of ego in my mind. When people were like giving great respect, and whenever I go to colleges and schools, whenever they invite me to give motivational speeches, they used to say, "Oh, the Prime Minister of the National Inclusive Children's Parliament." They wouldn't even stress the word National Inclusive Children's Parliament. The stress that they would give is to the word Prime Minister. So I think it's also the societal notion. But every time it just popped up, Father Edwin John, the founder of this system, usually tells us a small story. The word minister was derived from the Latin word ministere, which means to serve. So ministers are none other than servants. That also kind of helped me to balance my power, despite of the societal notions. The third thing is a system. So as I told you, Sociocracy is feedback. So whenever I talk at the UN, I'll have to come back and offer my team the feedback. What I talked in the UN, what they said, what are the contacts, and they'll help me to really choose something, to really think about something better. And that kind of helped me as well to balance my power. So feedback, as I told you.
I'm getting the impression. I mean, I think, if it's okay to say, I think you're an extraordinary person, and part of the thing you've had this incredible experience in a way you've found a way to kind of internalize the sociocratic approach. So most of the people, I didn't discover sociocracy, I don't know, probably 20 years ago or something like that. So most people come to sociocracy and approaches like that later in life. And then as you say, you bring along all these societal expectations.
That's true. That's true. I mean, in some places, I do encounter a lot of issues. I mean, I myself, I would say, was suppressed until like 10 years of age, and I was like suppressed because I was being a little innocent, and I was bullied in my school. I myself have had a little traumatic childhood days, but still, those also helped me to balance my power. So whenever I think about power, whenever I think about, oh, I'm now powerful, then I would also think about the times when I was powerless, the times when I had no voice.
And then when you're thinking about representing other people, you can empathize yourself into what it's like to be at the other end of the scale.
Very well said. Thank you, Pete.
No, that's great.
You are articulating it much better than what I would have done there.
We're doing it together, which is fine. So this is so useful, so interesting. And you talked a lot about sociocracy and how it works in the parliaments and all of that and the system, and you're very clear about all of that. How do you operate outside of that system? And can you apply that system to everything, or are there domains like you were talking about when you were working in that business? They're not operating that system. So how do you engage in a non-sociocratic system, I suppose?
To be honest, I'm trying to figure that out myself. Lately, like I'm trying to understand. I think this is where diplomacy comes. This is where, like, I am a student of international relations, and I feel that diplomacy means negotiation. So this is where negotiation, or this is where dialogue, this is where diplomacy, this is where strategic approach, all these things would come into existence, or all these things that we need to kind of operate in a non-sociocratic system. Being a sociocratic person, operating in a non-sociocratic system is quite challenging. I recently encountered NVC, nonviolent communication, and one of the things that we were learning in the NVC retreat is that apply NVC in a non-NVC system. So you can't really go and say, well, now my observation is this, now my need is this, now my feeling is this, now my request is no. You can't really say that, and nobody would understand you. This is just a format for you to understand. So now how do you apply this in a non-NVC setting, or in your family, or in a realistic situation, or in a place where you are really operating? So that's in your daily life, in other words, that's what I think. But I think one of the things that I'm using is communication. So how I articulate things, how I speak with my managers. For example, I won't be saying like, oh, you should do this. I would say, I think this would be a better way for us to do. What do you think? Immediately, the sociocratic principles would just knock at my mind saying, did you really ask? Do they really have an objection? Whether they have objection or not. So I would try to ask that in a very different way. So, and then I would like try to ask them, do you accept it? And then, like, for example, whenever there are no other steps taken in a meeting, then I would say, now could we all finalize what are the next immediate steps that each of us are going to take, and could we finalize each of our action items? And those are all things that would super helpful when I deal with a non-sociocratic environment as well. But I would use sociocracy, but in a different languaging. That's it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you're kind of adapting your language, aren't you, for the different environment, but you're still bringing in the kind of values and the framing and the way of thinking and all of that kind of stuff. I think that's very well said. Sorry, I've got loads more things I want to ask you, and I'm a little bit aware of the time, but I want to ask you something about, so how has this all affected you as a person, would you say, this experience across your life? I mean, and how would you relate your kind of inner development as well that's happened through all of this? How has that affected all of this? Are you very different now after having had all these experiences?
Of course, I'm very different to what I was before. So before, I didn't even know to speak for myself, nor speaking for others. But now
Mm.
I'm capable of, to an extent, capable of speaking for me, and as well as capable of speaking for the others. I'm able to articulate. I'm able to communicate my needs and my feelings along with that of the others. Um, I also feel that it's fascinating to see me, like, if you ask me, Swarna a decade ago or Swarna 15 years ago is completely different, because the way I think has changed. So every time, for example, when I got onto a stage, then I would be really nervous. I would not want to
Hmm.
speak with people. I'm not a very open speaker, public speaker, and I had constraints. I had social, like, I should say that I was brought up in a very orthodox family system where, like, this is how things must be. That's it. And I was always thinking within a boundary, but now I'm thinking, like, what if this happens? So I'm just kind of trying to, I mean, both and thinking, which is a tool of sociocracy that I felt, that I learned,
Hmm.
that actually changed my thinking process. So it just changed my thinking from either or perspective to both and perspective. It's just like beautiful thing.
Lovely.
So whenever my family talks with me, then they would say something. My father would say something. Mom would say something. Everybody would say something. Then I would try to incorporate and like put together the thinking. So before that, I was not such kind of a person.
Mm.
I would not
Great.
think of a solution, um, and I would just stick to only one thing. Like, no, this is what I think I got to do.
Mm. Mm.
So now
Uh,
I'm also experimenting. I'm shrinking down a decision. So, for example, whenever a decision is given to me, I'm trying to shrink down a decision and I'm trying to, like, utilize it. So, which is very helpful. I'm smiling every time I do that. I wouldn't do it consciously, but then when I realize it, I would smile at it. Very good. I think I'm doing it.
Everything you're saying is so wise, Swana. It's amazing. And one thing I wanted to ask you a little bit, and I don't want to kind of put too much emphasis on it because you completely, as far as I can experience it, you kind of overcome it, but you have had this disability. So is there something different about how you relate using power because you have a disability?
Actually, that's a very good question. I do want to talk about it. It's such an important topic because as a person with disability, one of the things that I experience, or that I think others would experience as well, is that power and powerlessness. So when you feel powerful when you're independent. So as a person
Hmm.
with visual disability, when I'm able to access the computer, when I'm able to access my phones by myself, when I'm able to pay, or when I'm able to order things, when I'm able to support my family, because always it's pursued, or it's perceived by the society. Sorry, it's perceived by the society that well, children, people with disabilities need help. And that's true. Yes, we do need help. And that also puts us in a situation which is slightly powerless. So when we realize that we're also able to help for somebody else, then that time I think we feel a little powerful. And
Mm.
I would also like to ask this question to you, Pete. So as a person without disability, you're a person without disability. And so how do you feel? I mean, when do you feel yourself powerful, and when do you feel yourself powerless in terms of, like?
Mm. Great question. And I'm not sure you're allowed to put me on the spot, but you just have. So I'm going to try and answer. When do I feel powerful and when do I feel powerless? I think for me, a lot of it is about not being able to speak, not being able to express myself.
Mm,
And it's like you were saying earlier about the example of the feedback being shut
mm,
down. If I'm not being heard, I think that's a very foundational thing for me.
not being heard. So
Mm.
sometimes when we ask for help, we are not heard. Like, we would ask
Uh,
for help, and then people would say, I mean, it's human. It's absolutely human to say. I mean, when you always ask, or when you're dependent, then you're relatively asking for help. And when you ask for help, not every time that everybody has to do for you, right? I mean, people
Yes.
would sometimes say no to you. When they say no to you, then it means that they're not hearing you.
Yes.
That's how it gets conveyed. I mean, if they say the reason why they're wanting to say no to you, then that's a whole lot of different things. But when they are not saying, let's do it later, because sometimes people would feel lazy, and you do understand that they feel lazy, and that's why they're saying no to you. But still, your mind would just make you feel that, no, you're not being heard. You're helpless. And so that's when that I have felt, as a person with disability, powerless. And that's why I try to be as independent as possible. And also, I mean, when there is a visual feedback that's going on, imagine that there is an exclusion. Exclusion is also powerless.
Yeah.
When your voice, as you said, very rightly said, when your voice is not heard. So for example, imagine everybody is making some visual action, and there is a game. So with my action, you should find what I'm doing. So if I'm, as a person with disability, made to do the action, I mean, especially visual disability, and when I'm made to do the action, then I feel included and I feel I'm heard. But when somebody makes the action and when you are finding it, then I wouldn't, and if I don't have an interpreter as well, then that time I feel powerless. So an instrument really bridges that power, is what I would say here. A tool. Or it could be an interpreter, or it could be a support worker. I think that's why in the UK, I pursued my master's in UK. So I have had support workers as well, supporting me to take notes, or be it in the lecture, wherever possible. I'm really grateful for my university, and as well as for my support workers. But I think that support worker, that instrument, like my laptop, which is giving me feedback that what's on the screen, as your eyes is giving, those are things that make me feel powerful, because they keep me independent.
Brilliant. So, and ultimately, it's coming down to some form of communication between people. And when you were talking about hearing, then, I mean, I don't know if this is right, but it sounds like there's a difference between, there are different kind of ways of hearing, aren't there? And somebody could ask for something to be done. I could ask for, but they're not really hearing me. And that's what I really want, is I want connection and attunement or something like that. Does that ring true?
Oh yeah, that's true. Actually, that that also reminds me of a lot of things. So, for example, in the organization that I currently work as Pratyek is the organization I work, and I work as a South Zone program coordinator. So, a program coordinator for the southern part. I'm handling 5 regions, six different regions, 5 states and 1 union territory in the southern part of India. And what my job is to connect with the NGOs who are interested in Children's Parliament, give them training, and get Children's Parliament established as well in their places, and help them to do local Children's Parliaments, and as well as bring them to the state and national level forums. Pratyek has been doing a lot more jobs, and it's very interesting to see that the way Pratyek hears children is just like incredible. So if a child has to be heard, then I think it is important that we hear them in a child-friendly language. So for example, we were recently doing an event, which is Summit of the Future, which is the event at the UN. And then we wanted to do, in correspondence to that event, Summit of the Children at the World Children's Parliament, which is again the global level of the federated structure of Neighbourhood Children's Parliament. And we organized that event, and we even finalized the declaration put together by children. We got recommendations from nearly 3,000 children. It was a lot of work for us to finalize as well, to support the children. And what happened was, once the recommendations were finalized, we were trying to put together the declaration similar to that of the Summit of the Future's declaration. Summit of the Future is supposed to be releasing a declaration, which they did, and we were trying to put our declaration corresponding to that of the declaration of Summit of the Future. What happened there was, we were trying to get feedback from the children. One of the children, Caitlin Colley in the UK, looked at this, and she couldn't really understand it very easily, because it was like preamble and guided principles and all those. And I gave it to her. She was like, okay, she just gave her consent. But as a facilitator, I was trying to hear them. I was trying to hear exactly what the child has been saying. And I realized that her mother was explaining the child and she was serving as a mediator. Now, how could I include the child without that mediator? That's inclusion and that's powerful. Sorry, that's inclusion, and that inclusion could bring power, because I know how lack of inclusion could make you feel powerless. And so that's when I realized, oh, okay, there's lack of inclusion, therefore she has to be interpreted, and I feel that she is slightly powerless, although she says she's powerful, although she says she consents to this. So then when I asked, her mother said, actually, I'm explaining her. And I asked how she explains, and she explained it to me the way she explained it to her daughter, to make her understand. And then I realized it's important that we translate this to a child-friendly language. And then when we made it to a child-friendly language, it was even more effective. And she felt very powerful, Caitlin. I mean, to us as well, that we felt very happy. And it was more, when there's a balance of power, there's a joy. That's an ultimate joy, I would say. There's egalitarianism, there's no ego. And so imagine there is a happy world with no egos, and you dream of a world, and that dream world is now happening. That's how it would be when you have a balance of power. And we experienced it with Caitlin Colley, because Colley just, as a 10-year-old, she just looked at it and just said, oh, now I understand this declaration, whatever you talk. It's like, wow. And because we changed it, we changed the preamble into overview. We changed the guided principles into we promise.
Yeah.
Pledge. That's
right.
Those were kind of like a child-friendly language.
That's a fantastic example again, and it plays to all of the things we're talking about, doesn't it? About communication, and I loved what you said as well about the joy that arises when, in that moment, when one of this kind of connection happens, and there is understanding, and there is that kind of group experience of democracy essentially experienced by everybody. I think that's spot on. I think we could talk for hours, but I think we should probably wind up there. Is there anything else you would just like to add before we close?
I think I would really want to say thank you to you, because this is such a wonderful opportunity to really explore how a power would be, and what is it like to experience power in both positive, negative, and in different perspectives. I mean, the reason why I'm saying positive and negative is, like, I think you guys are using better words than I do, because it's a healthy power and non-healthy power. So that's something that I really enjoy, and wanted to even adopt for myself. And I think it's what Sociocracy and Children's Parliament are doing is they're helping you to realize, analyze, and understand and get into a healthy power, is what I would say. It's kind of a joy when you experience a healthy power. When you say that, and when there is a healthy power, when there is, like, I have felt many a times that when there is a domination, when there is something, then you feel very heavy. You would not feel comfortable. You would want to talk behind the person, and all those qualities come in place. But when there is a healthy power, you would feel like, well, actually, what Pete said is also, it also makes sense. How do we kind of incorporate that kind of an incorporating thinking, or both and thinking, would just come into place when there is healthy power. So yeah, I wish that this entire world is shifted to a healthy power.
Thank you.
And
Well,
the work
maybe
that you are doing is incredible.
and you as well. Incredible work you're doing too. So thank you so much. Love to get you back maybe in a year or so and see how it's all going, if you would consider that.
Oh, of course, yeah, I'd be happy to really talk with you how my perspectives have changed compared
And
to
we
what
can
I possess
continue
right now.
and
Yeah.
we can continue the conversation. That would be lovely. Thank you. So and thank you so much for coming, Swarna, and thank you to all the people kind of out there that are listening to this. We really appreciate you listeners as well, and hope some of it's settling in and helping you in some ways to adopt practices of healthy power. And we will release some more episodes shortly.